of the Oscar-nominated How to Survive a Plague. We're so happy to have him back. Please welcome David Franz. And as a reminder, David's book from last year, How to Survive a Plague, the inside story of how citizens and science tamed all. We'll be doing a signing in the lobby directly after this program. Next up, I'd like to bring up the director of Best of Luck with the Wall. Josh is the data artist. This is his first film. Please welcome Josh Begley. Sorry about that. Cohen is one of our favorite filmmakers here. He's been making amazing movies for a couple decades, including Benjamin Smoke and Instrument and Chain and Museum Hours and Counting. And tonight we saw Birth of a Nation, Jem's latest work, and we're so happy to have him back. Please welcome Jem Cohen. And so happy to have Laura here. I feel like Field of Vision was exactly the kind of media collective that we didn't know we needed, but we really need now. Of course, in addition to co-running Field of Vision with her colleagues, she's a great filmmaker who's made movies like My Country, and The Oath, and Citizen 4. Please welcome Laura Poitras.
I can wander into the room. Excellent.
So thank you all for being here. I was going to start with David. And I think part of the reason that several years ago we had such a great run in New York with your film is that it was a movie about such dark subject matter that felt hopeful. And I'm curious what you see in that history that can give us some hope about the challenges that we face today.
Well, thank you, and it's so great to be here. Thank you all for coming to see our films tonight. I witnessed the AIDS epidemic from the first day, and I knew what many people knew who survived those years, even I imagine the people who didn't, that there was a lot of genuine brilliance that was called upon and that made itself available to the movement, and that made a huge difference. A lot of it wasn't acknowledged at the time, and I didn't start working on the film until 15 years after the plague had come to an end in '96 with the advent of the drugs that I track in the film, and I kept saying to people, a lot of good came from AIDS. There's a tremendous legacy, not just of activism and human resilience, but of a kind of a revolutionary change to the way medicine and science is handled, the way culture considered, certain communities. And there's so much change that was so fundamental that we've all taken for granted that it almost became just totally ingrained in the way we thought of kind of American life or Western life or modern life, and the fact that you could trace it back to just a small handful of individuals doing amazing work was something that I knew existed, and I wanted to kind of enshrine and canonize in a way. I guess it's hard as you're watching these things happen to know what it's going to add up to, and I had the luxury of having that large 15-year period to know that there really were heroes, and that their stories really would be meaningful for the ages.
Laura, I was wondering if you can talk about Field of Vision has been around for a couple of years now. Can you talk about how kind of the mission of that project, if it feels different in the past couple of months? I mean, I feel like you guys were loaded for bear from the beginning, coming out of your experience with Snowden and kind of being in a somewhat oppositional dynamic to even the Obama administration and their patterns. But have things felt different when you guys are making decisions in the last couple of months?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for organizing tonight, and I love your film, David, and I loved it when I first saw it, and I love it more today. It really just gives us a sense of how to organize and how to focus energy in a way that has enormous impact and not disperse energy, and that's one of the things that I think I'm thinking about a lot today, because I think everything that's happening is so shocking, and it so takes of energy, and how can we use that energy or response to that in ways that are effective and focused and strategic and not just reactive. So I think it's just an amazing reminder of brilliant organizing and brilliant activism. And the other thing I love about the film is it's constructed it's filmed in the moment. And I know when you look at all the archival sources on there, that's filmed by dozens of people, and that you guys did an amazing job of going back and then telling these stories that you weren't filming when it was happening, but that you constructed it after the events unfolded, which connects to some of the work we're trying to do at Field of Vision, is try to have our fingers on the pulse a bit, and so one of our motivations, so this is a project that I co-created with Charlotte Cook, who's here, and AJ Schnock, and we define it as sort of visual journalism, where we're trying to bring filmmakers into the news gathering, and one of the major impulses for that is the sense that documentary filmmakers want to respond more quickly to what's happening in the world, and not just in long form, because that takes so much time. And so how can we be responding in a more rapid pace? And how can we support filmmakers? And so I'm really committed to that, and I think it allows us to sort of make work that is in dialogue with the news cycle. And so that is definitely applicable to Josh's film, which I think every time you make a piece of work, it's always in dialogue with the historical moment. There's like a kind of resonance, and that resonance always changes as the historical moment changes. And that is no more obvious than with Josh's film, because we published it about a week before the election. And this was a film that we loved. When I first saw the first cut of it, I said, this film makes me so happy, because because of its aesthetics, because of its politics, because of its humor, and for all those reasons, was so thrilled to collaborate with Josh and support it. But we didn't actually know, we loved the film and we were totally behind it, but we actually didn't know the new kinds of meanings it would have if Trump was elected. Even if we could kind of game it out and say, well, it'll have a different impact, but you actually don't know. And so now when it plays, and so when Trump came in, when he was inaugurated, and he started talking about the wall again, our views on social media went up by like at least 1 million in 3 days. And so it sort of just, we realized we'd sort of tapped into something, and that the piece had done that.
Josh, do you want to talk about the origin of the concept of your film?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us all here. For me, there was something about the way that I consume news and visual information on the internet that made me want to go in an opposite direction from what I usually do as a reader, which is to say, I find myself with a very short attention span and wanting to collapse things into a very short space. And there was something for me about the way the wall was being talked about as this concept, this soundbite that can reduce a 2,000-mile stretch into something that is absent a geography, that is just a metaphor, it's just a soundbite. And so the film really began wanting to look at this space. What does the southern border of the United States look like? What would it actually mean to have a wall that is a contiguous wall across the whole space? And once you start to look at this space, you see, oh, more than half of this is a river, and it's very windy, and a wall is perhaps one of the most preposterous ideas there could ever be. So for me, putting it out mostly on social media, I think is where it's been seen, really allowed for a sort of a pulling apart and a putting back together of this very shortened soundbite that is also referencing a very, very long geography.
So, Jim, I was wondering if you could talk about the rhythm, your rhythm as an artist, as a filmmaker, because with this film, with Birth of a Nation, and I think also with the newsreels that you did around Occupy, you were operating in a different way than with your features, where they weren't necessarily of the moment or present or current. They took their time and they had other guiding forces. But these works seem to be driven creatively by this kind of unwavering kind of current context of the world. And I'm just curious, how is that as an artist to go from one kind of narrative rhythm to another?
Well, I worked on projects that took 10 years, a few of them. Instrument, Benjamin Smoke was over a 10-year arc. And then, the Occupy newsreels, which are called the Gravity Hill newsreels, were one of the first sort of major changes of gear for me. And a lot of it came out of a conversation that I had with you, because I was going down, initially I found, I was dubious about the whole situation, but it was something that I wanted to witness. And one of the things that I strongly feel is that I like to shoot. I don't always love protests. I've been going since 1972 to giant ones against the Vietnam War and countless others. I don't love everything about them. I find them often frustrating, repetitive. But I'm a body, I'm there. So there's a degree to which I like to be a kind of careful, somewhat maybe distanced observer. And then there's another degree to which it's just time to hit the streets, and I want to be a body in that activity. So we had this conversation where you asked me what filmmakers were doing, and I said, well, there's a million cameras down at Occupy, and there are certain kinds of projects that are surely being made. But maybe there's room for a lot of different ways to look at it. And then you said, is anybody making newsreels? And I thought, and I said, well, if I make them, will you show them? And next thing I knew, I was turning those around in 2 or 3 or 4 days, and which is the way that I did this one. I went down on the 19th and 20th and cut it on the 21st, and I don't quite know what to make of it, but there's that initial impulse, which is two things. One, to observe, to try to do it carefully, to maybe not have a preordained agenda or determination. And then the other impulse is to be a body, because sometimes I think that we have to be there. So very different processes, but really in a way not that different.
I think of this weird era of kind of a negativity about what journalists can be in America. I remember, thinking at that time, I hadn't been down to Occupy, but I didn't feel satisfied with kind of what I was reading about or what I was hearing about it, and I learned about it by seeing the work of an artist that wasn't trying to be a talking heads, text-filled kind of version of that narrative. And I feel like artists have these different routes to help tell the truth about what's happening today. It's not just straight journalism. It's these kind of ruminations and experiential narratives, I think, are important too. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys in a second here, but when we had this documentary festival last fall, that was a couple of days after the election, and I remember looking out on this field of filmmakers at this luncheon thinking, wow, these people have a lot of pressure on them. All these documentarians, they've got like a big job that they, may not have bargained for. I'm just, I'm wondering for any of you, do you feel like your job in 2017 has been amped up, or is it harder to go back to the projects that you were kind of thinking about and working about 2 years ago? Is it a clear the next moment, or is that too severe?
That's a fascinating question. And I was lucky enough to be working on another documentary about activism, and about kind of a triumphant kind of activism. And although it's also an historic story from the 60s and 70s, it's about...
This is Untitled David France 2017.
It's the Untitled David France. We actually locked picture today, so we have a title. It's the death and life of Marsha P. Johnson. And Marsha Johnson was one of the people at Stonewall at the night of the riots in 1969, but she was also the founder of the first transgender rights organization. So it's about her accomplishments against odds, and how she did it. So I think that there are stories from our own lives and from recent history that give us the kind of encouragement and power and faith that we need at a time like this. And certainly, I think How to Survive a Plague as a story has done that. I think, as you mentioned earlier, that we're hungry for examples of people who, as powerless as they might be, have been able to find whatever it takes to stand up and then actually accomplish something in the face of all of this. And just knowing that it has happened in the past is an essential seed to seeing that it can happen today.
One thing I think is interesting in the coverage, there's the mainstream coverage, which actually strangely has covered the protest. The coverage of the Women's March, it started a little bit, first you were like, where is it on the front page? And then it actually was on the front page of the Times and the Post. And I always remember going to the Times and paging through the photographs and thinking I would see 5 photographs maybe of the major cities, and you kept hitting forward, and there was 40 photographs. And you realize that there was a different kind of coverage of what's happening now in comparison, for instance, if you think of the Iraq War protests, which were also massive, which were vastly undercovered by mainstream media. And so there is something, you feel like there's a somewhat of a shift in mainstream news coverage, which seems to be more aggressive than it was, and unfortunately it comes a bit late, post-Trump election, but I actually think it is somewhat positive that the resistance that we're seeing is a positive sign.
Go ahead.
For me, I think I feel really pulled actually to this idea of being a body and just being with lots of people right now. I think in terms of my work, I've felt both the desire to simply be a body and be with people, and then in the moments when I'm sort of recharging from those times of being with lots of people, that's when the work is being made. And I think for me, both at the same time is sort of the only way I can imagine this year for myself. But I think there are also lots of lessons to be learned in terms of tactics, in terms of the way that public space is narrated and the way that movements are narrated. But yeah.
I had an interesting experience coming out of the Women's March and walking into the National Gallery of Art, which is blessedly free in Washington, D.C., and there were all these people, other people who were clearly there coming from the Women's March, and it was towards the end of the day, and the march was pretty much petered out. And it was one of those times where, the question was sort of floating in the air, like, is this a moment in which all of this art becomes trivial or secondary? And that wasn't what was happening at all. Certainly not for me, but I think for a lot of the other people that I saw, which is that there was something incredibly powerful and stirring about seeing that, like, I don't know, for one thing, treating each other like shit and trying to make profit off each other is not the only thing that humans do. Like, they do all of this other stuff, and we have things from thousands of years ago that people have made that are still incredibly potent. And then, you know, you also have specifically incredible work by Goya or Manet or whatever that can have direct political currency and yet is still also timeless. So I had this really, like, it just felt great to be at both of those places in the same day.
Okay, well, I'm momentarily feeling very glad to be an American, based on the bifurcated Washington, D.C. memory, and we have time for a couple questions from you guys. Yes, right here.
Is there a mic?
I'll repeat if you
I was a filmmaker for many, many years, and I love Citizen Four, and I love the film today, and there's so many other films to talk about that really celebrate organizing and celebrate whistleblowers. But I'm also very sad that year after year these films come out, and we live in a media-bombarded society that takes distraction to an art form, and a good definition of a liberal is someone who sees a documentary like this and thinks they've done something. And I feel always sad. Well, I guess my question is, what would you need to maybe next time you make a film have an organizer involved so that when people leave the theater, there are people outside that can sign them up now that their awareness is raised about something, that they're angry, they want to know what can I do, because there's that 2 minutes when they leave the theater before they get distracted by a Twitter or a Facebook where you can actually organize using media, which is a tremendous tool for organize, but it's such a tragedy that it's not being used.
I would give the audience a bit more credit than that. I actually do think that people have agency and can and do absorb.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, the question the gentleman was asking, what can filmmakers do to engage audiences after they've seen the film, to take the spirit and the energy from the experience of watching the film and translate that into presumably some kind of active engagement with the world on that subject, and you know what can we do to allow viewers to continue that engagement, presumably through social media.
I mean, and I was saying that I think I give people a bit more credit. I mean, if we think about how people descended upon Terminal 4 JFK after the executive order as an example of that, and I think it's a combination of both channeling people's outrage, and then also I think people, if they're going to take that time, think that it has an impact. And so I do think there needs to be strategies of any type of organizing to sort of funnel people's energy so that it can be impactful. But I also agree that there are lots of people who do. I'm sure that around your film there was organizing, and I mean every documentary filmmaker does do a certain amount of that. But I'm not convinced that we make film. I think that there are other reasons to make films that have to do with sort of shifting consciousness, as opposed to giving people like a program what to do when they leave.
And that film is such an incredible wealth of complex history. It's not, I think that we are enriched by studying history, and we get to see it not only in little tiny sound bites, but in hearing people really talk and really hash things out, and I really value that, including seeing not glossing over the complexities and ambivalently are in the crash, and they're like, oh my God, we're in the crash, and you watch something like that and you're like, you know, those people were fully in the crash, and a lot of other people sort of thought everything was okay. And, you know, Laura, you know, sometimes I would think that she might wish that she didn't know some things that she knows, but she, in her experience with meeting Snowden and other such experiences of being in Iraq and so on, you were in the crash in a way where a lot of us just were sort of in the slow skid that's a lot easier to ignore. So, I mean, one of the things that we have to do is just kind of become aware that for some people, it's sort of like they're always in a state of emergency. And right now, a lot of us are feeling a state of emergency that we're suddenly aware of in a way that we haven't been. But it's history that allows us to connect it and see the broader picture of it.
The question was about whether or not essentially video production technology and perhaps other digital media has allowed these filmmakers to feel freed and empowered to tell stories they might not have otherwise done before all this great technology.
When I first went back to all that old footage, I was disappointed at the quality of it. It's a medium that's not intended to last, and it wasn't lasting. And we were preserving it as rapidly as we could with very expensive process. We were taking entire libraries, 800 hours of old video footage were preserved, on this private budget of other people's footage. But as we were doing it, we kind of fell in love with the look. We fell in love with the old VHS, the tactile kind of aspect of the color, and we realized that it told a story about a time. And so what started out as a disappointment became a real kind of fetish, kind of an artistic desire. So every once in a while we would find footage that somehow miraculously survived, and we brought the quality of it down to mix it in so that it wouldn't stand out and make everything else look so odd. But it became the language of that film, and I think I'm hoping that people are saving footage in the same way from their cell phones, and we'll be creating a new language that people can use in their films. But I do worry that there's no central repository for cell phone footage, and that it's likely to get lost more quickly than big clunky tapes that sit under people's desks.
The NSA has it all.
Oh, the NSA will just Laura will show us how to get that.
Stole my punchline. Yes, right here.
Well, I would like to thank you for organizing this, first of all. And second, I loved your film with the survival of the plague, because it actually gives us hope that together we can overcome significant hurdles. And I guess my question is, what kinds of topics might we consider seeing in film to have positive examples that we could actually use today? Because there are places where they're actually doing really special work. I'm doing things with the Scottish Police Federation or Union, in which they are trying to reorganize the police so that we can stop and frisk. They can actually do de-escalation. And I'd love to see examples in which you can take complex organizations and actually attempt to show that you can do miraculous things.
So it's a question I think about on some level. Where can you dig in? It's a big world, and lots of different executive orders coming out all the time. Hard to know where to start. I mean, on some level, I feel like all these leaks that we hear about from intelligence in the White House, I feel like, man, if there are dozens of people leaking, can't one of them be like a filmmaker? Can't one of them be making a movie? I don't know. Is there anything here for you guys to bite into?
I would say, well, of course, we're very interested in leaked video, but in terms of, I'm not sure that documentary filmmakers should set out to create positive stories, but one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is how to be strategic in what we do and not be reactive. And I think that we don't have to look any further than how the both the current administration and others are being very strategic. There's another film that Field Division is funding by Brian Knappenberger, which looks at the takedown of Gawker and how a billionaire funded a lawsuit that brought down a media company. And it also looks at the buying of the Las Vegas Journal. And you realize, like, okay, these billionaires who want to attack the media, they're thinking really hard about it, and they're putting a lot of resources and being very strategic. And the answer to that kind of strategic is not just to be reactive and create defense funds and, we need to think about who's going to be attacked, what communities are going to be attacked next, how to protect those communities, and how to do that in a strategic way. And I don't think that's just for filmmakers to do. I think that's for us as citizens to do.
Yes.
What strategies and obstacles do you put together as documentarians to kind of create a space for the power of the documentary film among the continuum of so much entertainment that is so much more easily viewed and more inviting on Facebook or Instagram? Like, are there ways that you try to integrate the power of the documentary statement in terms of the incredible persuasive information that can sort of like poke keyholes into either like the John Oliver show, or just to sort of make documentary power a little bit more mainstream, to kind of level the playing field? What do you think about in your work in terms of like, how do we go about doing that in order to get real information into the mainstream context?
I never try to level the playing field. I left the playing field. I try to make things that are in some way oppositional, not just in content, but in form. I think about form all the time. I mean, this is the most incredible moment to think about documentary form, because we have a reality television president, and reality television is a form that crept up on us for 25 years or so. And it's a terrible perversion of very, very important strains of documentary history, of certain kinds of verite and certain kinds of things that got manipulated and twisted and put down to their very lowest common denominator, that not only did great damage within the documentary field, but to some degree gave us this nightmare. So I don't know that became the playing field, and I don't want to be part of that playing field. I want to, even if it's not for a mass audience, I want to make things that maybe force you to stare at one thing for a while so that you have some room for your mind to move, so that you're not just dealing with like a digestible story, character, those certain kinds of tropes that I think not only is it problematic that they become kind of dictates within the field, but they're problematic for other reasons, because you stop seeing when you're just constantly taking in that kind of anyway.
I could speak just very quickly on behalf of the playing field. Having come to documentary filmmaking through journalism, although I started in the alternative press, I came up through the New York Times and Newsweek, and was doing kind of reporting for the masses before taking on this. This was my first documentary project. And what I was surprised by, to your point, was how powerful the documentary is as a kind of a cultural tool. It surprised me and shocked me how much I felt like I had a kind of a powerful engine in my hand that I'd never had before, not with books or magazine pieces, even celebrated work that didn't have the kind of grip on culture that a documentary can have. And I've seen it in so many examples of that it can do that. It can change dialogue, and it can refocus conversation, and it can give new life to ideas, and that's been really surprising to me. So I understand your question, and I think that there is room for increasing that, but it's already there, and it's already really powerful.
For me, I think just not being scared of the platforms is an important part. Most of the work I make involves downloading images from the internet and putting them out into Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat. And I think that there's tremendous value that can come from some of those platforms, especially when what is being delivered is not your usual entertainment 2-minute video or promo video, but something that you're not quite sure what it is. I think there's a lot of power in that across platform.
So unfortunately, there's another movie that was supposed to start in this room a minute ago. So I'm gonna have to bring this to a close. I'd love to do something like this again. If you are, if you're not on the IFC Center newsletter list, please check out our website and sign up. You'll see under this event the details about Laura